Donc, vous allez voir. Et on va vous présenter sur un thème qui est un thème lourd et grave, puisqu'il s'agit de la nouvelle identité du masculin. Quand j'ai eu cette présentation, je me suis dit qu'il fallait tous, hommes et femmes, qu'on fasse quelque chose assez vite, parce que ce qui arrive est grave, et particulièrement grave sur les jeunes, où il y a une violence qui est en train de monter qui n'est pas possible. Donc je vous laisse écouter la présentation, les données chiffrées, vous expliquer le principe de cette étude, mais je pense qu'au-delà, toutes les études, elles sont faites pour que nous agissions, pour que nous fassions des choses dans la vie. Et je pense qu'après cette étude, vous allez nommer une quantité de femmes au pouvoir pas possible. Donc, merci à vous de nous aider pour cela. Clément et Seb.
Français? English?
English.
English, OK.
I prefer your English. What do you do? Why do you don't enter? I'm waiting for you. We cannot do this presentation without you. Sorry. And you.
Hello?
And you.
So this is Prosumer presentation. It's a quantitative research that we do. We've been doing for the last more than 20 years now, prosumers. So 30 markets, 15,000 people. And the goal of prosumers is to understand what's to come, what are the new beginnings that we need to catch. So we identify the most proactive, predictive consumers, and we compare them with mainstream consumers. And when prosumers agree with a statement, we know that it's going to become mainstream in the next 6 to 18 months. As Mercedes was saying, we wanted to talk about masculinity because we decide the topics in October 2025. And in October 2025, I don't know if you all remember, but there was the Adolescence series on Netflix where people actually discovered that like very young teens were subject to masculinist messages on TikTok, on Instagram, on social media. And then many people started to talk about these figures. So Andrew Tate, for instance, I'm not going to read the quote, but you can read it for yourself. Very violent, very anti-women quotes. And also on social media, we saw more and more of people deriving from these very violent behaviors and messages, talking about how you can looks max, so how you can be the best version of a man you can be, the most beautiful man, even if it means that you have to break your jaws to have a new jawline that is more masculine, more strong, etc. We talk about Sigma males, and we saw a research this morning that says that it actually takes 26 minutes for someone on TikTok to be in contact with a masculinist content. 26 minutes. So imagine your children, if they are 13, 14, 15, in 26 minutes, they are in contact with masculinist content. So this is why we started the research on masculinity, on violence, and on masculinistic content. And if you remember, if you're very loyal to the prosumer research, I think 15 years ago, Marianne Salzman at the time, who was running the prosumer research, was talking about the metrosexuel. The metrosexual, which became a very well-known expression, men who were assuming a part of femininity, who were taking care of themselves, etc. And also, so this was for us a very interesting point, like 15 years after, is the metrosexual still around? Not really. So how brutal is the shift? And the shift is actually very, very brutal, with two statements that you see here. So I believe masculinity is under attack and needs to be defended. 45% of prosumers agree with the statement, and a big difference between prosumers and mainstream. And of course, we're going to come back to this, a big difference between male and female, but even 32% of female in the research say that masculinity is under attack and needs to be defended. And of course, the second statement, we wanted to provoke people so that we understand how they feel. Today, it is more difficult to be a man than a woman. 40% of prosumers, 46% of male. So female, they know the stuff, but it's still 26%.
This is a reaction to the women have made a very small route. We have some, not equality, but some things more positive. And they cannot bear. They consider it's too much. We have too many possibilities now. And is the reason of this election. The poor men, we are taking the place of the men. Is a reaction, is a normal reaction, because in the world this kind of reaction is not the first time, but we have this kind of reaction.
And you're going to see all along the presentation, so the big difference, the big cultural differences between the countries. So we said, yes, the shift is very brutal, but it's divided. And the countries that are really agreeing with, like, okay, it's more difficult to be a man than a woman, masculinity is under attack. You're going to see India, you're going to see the US, obviously, you're going to see China. We said the skeptical, even though the numbers are quite high in the UK and in France. And as Mercedes was saying, what is really worrying is that it's more important for the youngest ones. So the youngest ones are really agreeing that masculinity is under attack, it needs to be defended, it's harder to be a man than a woman. And you see a big difference between Gen Z and boomers. It's going to be even bigger on other statements, and a difference, of course, between male and female. And as Mercedes was saying, we feel also that this is a backlash from the Me Too movement, the movement for women equality, and many men consider that if women have more place in the world, then it means for them that it's an attack on them. Because the cake is not bigger, so if women have more place, then of course it means that I have less place. What is interesting, and sometimes what is intense for us, is that people are a bit schizophrenic, like they agree with something and also with something else. In the future, I believe traditional gender roles will blur completely. You see kind of a vast majority, 58% of prosumers agreeing with the statement. It doesn't mean that it's okay for them if we go that way. So yes, they agree with the statement. Maybe genders are going to blur, but I'm not okay with that. And we see that, of course, in the statement. So the question we are going to ask through the presentation is, what's wrong with men? I'm a man, but I don't know what's wrong. So we're going to try to explore what's wrong with men. And the first part of the presentation is around this idea that the role models for men are changing, and the warrior, the man at war, is a new role model for many men and many young men. Because of the state of the world. So, of course, you're gonna see that masculinity is in crisis because the world is in crisis. I don't know if you see, yeah. The world is in crisis. The future looks more and more uncertain. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. There are the rise of geopolitical conflict. So when the future is uncertain, masculinity is also uncertain. And what is interesting is that the first reaction to this uncertain world is the return of strength, of dominance, of violence. So the men's pursuit of physical strength is mainly linked to, and we gave several options to people, and the first one was the rise of geopolitical conflict. We see wars, we see conflict, we see tension everywhere in the world. So the first reaction is like, okay, I have to dominate, I have to be dominant, I have to use strength, and the world is violent, so my response has to be violent. And it's especially the case here in India, whereas in the other country it was not so high, but still they had many options. So if the world is violent, being soft is now an insult. Softness is not a quality anymore, and you see everywhere on social media, and especially on TikTok, being a soft boy is an insult. So today, I think men are softer than previous generation. 63% of prosumers, so a vast majority agree with the statement. And it's also very high on the female side. And I think today young boys are overly protected and they won't be able to stand up as men in the future. Because the world is uncertain, it's violent, it's dangerous, you need to stand up. And we think that softness is not a quality anymore, because you need to show strength and to show dominance towards others. And of course, if...
Sorry, just a moment. If you want to enter, you enter. Huh? You are not like...
Enter.
Yes, don't hesitate. Huh? It's just question of men. Huh? It's not dangerous. Huh? We are very soft.
Yeah, we are soft.
Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. I don't like you are not comfortable.
The second expression of this return to strength, to dominance, is also muscle, is also going to the gym. If you have children that are in their teenage years, 17, 18, they are all obsessed with having a fit body, showing the muscle, even the muscle in the jawline, because if I have a perfect muscle jawline, then I'm more beautiful and attractive to others than the others. So I think it's essential that men work out. 76% of prosumers, and look at France. No. Like muscle, working out, not for us, thank you. So only 38% of prosumers, but a big difference between prosumer and mainstream. And as I was saying, if you have young adults at home, you see the huge difference. Boomers wouldn't care at the time about showing strength, showing muscle, etc. But 68% of Gen Z compared to 43% only of boomers. So the world is becoming a competition where the strongest reign supreme. I believe that competition between men brings out the best of them. Again, a big difference between prosumers and mainstream. So remember 5 or 6 years ago, even in the workplace, being empathetic towards your people, etc., was something super important. Now we see a real shift. It's uncertain. The world is violent, and competition between people is good. It's a good thing for people. And as I was saying, the new hero that we see everywhere is the warrior. I don't know if you've seen so many articles since the war in Ukraine started, people volunteering to go fight with Ukrainian people from everywhere in the world, because I admire men who are engaged in wars around the world to defend their countries. 59% of prosumers. And here, not a real difference between men and women. And we're going to see very, very high numbers from China, from Saudi Arabia, from India, even from the UK. Because if you're going to fight, if you're going to stand up, yes, you're a new hero, you're a new role model. And of course, when we follow the thread of strength, of dominance, when it comes to politics, and you see here the 3 people who represent this idea of like showing authority, being authoritarian, which is even more than authority, being kind of almost a dictator, is something that is interesting and worth of admiration for people. I admire political leaders who show strength and inspire fear to others. At some point, we had like diplomacy, but it feels like today, no, it's only like, this is what I want, you're going to do this. If it's another country, it's not a problem. So 39% of prosumers agreeing. You're going to see 48 in the US, 60% in the UK, 88% in China, and of course, you're going to see Xi Jinping, you're going to see Putin, you're going to see Trump with the famous handshake where he has to destroy your hand when he shakes your hand, because he has to show dominance in the game. So, l'homme est un loup pour l'homme. We are going back to this era.
I prefer the loup of romance.
Yeah.
It's nice.
We prefer the wolf of Intermarché.
Yes.
The wolf who is a bit deconstructed.
Yes.
it would be better. And what is so the research is on masculinity, but otherwise is actually really surprising to us is that this return of showing strength, showing dominance, is something that is interesting for men and women. So we are going towards the alpha society, where we have to command respect, we have to show strength and dominance. I think it's a good thing that some women behave like alpha women. You see the number is even higher than for the men. So there is a contagion effect. Yes, it's about the masculinity, feeling attacked, feeling, I would say, attacked by the progress in women equality. But it's also a return to strength and dominance for women. So men are under pressure, Clément, non?
Yes, of course, because it comes with a cost. It comes with a cost, this coming back of violence, strength, and muscle, and maybe not every man is ready to embrace this global trend. So it comes with a lot of tensions, paradoxes, and that lead us to men experiencing some pressure. So we have already touched base on these striking figures. Today it is more difficult to be a man than a woman. Of course, it's wrong, because we know that if you take all the companies listed, for instance, the CEOs who are women are very few. We know that the gap in salary between men and women is still huge, so it's totally wrong. But it's the feeling that men have, that it has become more difficult for them. I think Mercedes had a very robust explanation on that, explaining that 1 inch toward more equality is perceived as, for some men, kind of stepping back for them. So it's something which is very complicated to cope with. But it's not to be the lawyer, I don't know how we say that in English, actually.
The devil's advocate.
Exactly, thank you. There are a couple of weak signals in terms of statistics that worth being noticed. So, for instance, that can explain this feeling, this perception of a society which is tougher on men than it is on women, especially for the youngest. For instance, young men have 3 to 4 more chances to commit suicide than women. Maybe because actually there are a higher number of declaring not having close friends compared to only 27% of women who agree with the same statement. And actually, beyond, I would say, this question of perception, there are 2 interesting statistics that worth being taken into account. The first one is that we know that in the US, for the first time in the history of the country, the percentage of women graduated from lawyer school, business schools, and engineer schools is higher than men. So it's a big shift, and it's a drastic shift in the way this education is structured in the US. And for instance, it's true that after the 2008 big crisis, blue-collar jobs were the first one to be destroyed, where historically men were overrepresented. And within the services where women are more represented than men, the growth is stronger. So there are a few weak signals that can explain as well this amplification of a feeling of disappointment for young men, but it's not an excuse. So we are going to see that actually it leads young men to feel that they are totally confused. They don't know how to behave. They don't know what is their genuine and natural place in society, because for centuries, their place was to dominate. So if their place is not to dominate again and to rule without any question, without any sharing, any power, of course, it leads them to ask the question what it means to be a man in modern society. And we are going to see that actually, and it was interesting that you mentioned the metrosexual, it's not over. I mean, the models are coexisting right now, and that explains maybe why it is so complex and polarizing. And maybe one fundamental tension that triple downs on all the fields is that paradox that has been called the paradox of good man versus real man. And there are kind of indeed schizophrenia when it comes to society and when we expect men to be. Because we teach them, and this was a research conducted in West Point in the US, which is the school that trained the future of militaries and the high-ranking militaries. When we ask them what it is to be a good man, they say that it's all about honor, duty, a sense of sacrifice, responsibility, and so on. So it's being a good person and embody positive values. But at the same time, they have the feeling that they have to be a real man. And a real man would be someone stoic, never showing feelings, playing through pain, getting rich and getting laid. So it's quite the opposite. So we have taught them to be good men, and at the same time we have exposed them to images, myths, and representation of tough and real men. And we're going to see that it's very complicated to cope with such paradoxical injunctions. So first, for instance, we believe that it's important for a man to show his emotion. 20% more female agree with the statement, but it's still above half, 1 out of 2 men agree to say that it's important to show his emotion. But at the same time, we are requested to show self-discipline. We are requested to prevent our emotions to take over, because more self-discipline is exactly what men need right now, especially in a geopolitical context that sees the war coming back, especially in the Western world. So there's here a first contradiction, showing your emotion but being in control. So how can you show your emotion if you have constantly to be self-disciplined and in control? I went too fast? No, it's a good one. The second tension, which is also very interesting, is, and I think that we have discussed that maybe 2 years ago in Cannes. Last year it was about the leaders, but 2 years ago we discussed about mental health issues. And what was really interesting post-COVID is that we are starting to pay attention to mental issues, and we all agree worldwide that it is important to be open about the question of mental health. 89% of Prosumer, and the same level of agreement between male and female. But at the same time, it's important to show strength, to command respect. So if you're open about your mental health, it means that you can show the other one some perceived or so-called weaknesses, which are contradictory with the fact that when you have to deal with strong, so-called strong men and leaders, like the president of the 3 biggest countries in the world, without mentioning anyone, of course you cannot show any strength. You cannot show any weakness, and you have to show strength. And that's also something really interesting. So males tend not to agree, but the prosumer are indicating a dynamic where actually it will become normal to cry in front of the other when you're moved or upset, because it comes with expressing your emotions and your feeling. And at the same time, a man who goes to therapy gains power. And here it's a very interesting thing maybe that can help to solve the tension. Because you can talk about your mental health issues and you can be open about your emotion if the ultimate goal is not necessarily to feel better, but to be stronger. And I have a friend, for instance, who was a young adult at home who had some mental issues. And he was trying to convince him to go and see a therapist. And it was a big failure because he said, I'm not a weak guy, I'm not a soft boy, so I don't need to go to see a therapist. And this young adult also goes to the gym, to the gym club every day. So the father said, when you go to the gym club, you have a coach. So it's the same. It's not a therapist, it's a coach, but not to muscle your body, but to strengthen your brain. And he accepted to go and see the therapist because he felt that it was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of regaining control and power. So it shows how it can be complex sometimes when you dig into people's brains. Maybe one thing which has been solved, and because men are always smart when it comes not to work, no, I'm kidding, but I'm convinced that men who choose to be stay-at-home fathers are just as masculine as those who climb corporate ladders. They are getting well along with this new reality where women are the first provider and bring more money in the household, but because the primary measure of a man's worth is his professional success and earning, it's less true. So it looks like same, it's the new reality difficult to apprehend, where it's not necessarily climbing the corporate ladder that is a sign of success and a sign of masculinity, and the signs of masculinity are maybe now correlated and linked to your body appearance, your physical appearance, and the way you treat the other gender. So, and last tension between the good man and the wrong man, which actually not a tension, maybe everyone is lying, I don't know, but which of the following do you think are the top two most important qualities for a man? Everyone agrees to say that it's both honesty and empathy. And I think bad boys are more attractive than gentlemen. We didn't have a great success with this statement because no. But it's still worth noticing the gap, even if it's only 5 points, between female and male. So some believe that they still have to behave like that to be able to seduce. And actually the dating market, and we're going to touch base on that in a couple of slides, is a true very structuring topic for young men and for the rise of this famous incel. And I remind you that incel means involuntary celibs. And that's the true key that can explain why it has become so violent in relationship. So maybe we can say, if we try to sum up in a very radical way, I would say men tend to admire real men and women tend to value good men. So it means that there's a shift, there's a gap, that leads us to ask the question to know if we are still on the same boat and still able to live and coexist. To live together or coexist, actually, it looks like we are more able to coexist than to live together and to mingle. Because if masculinity is in crisis, women also seem to face their own split, their own division and polarization. And it's very interesting when you look, especially on social media and the way women are dealing with the question of feminism. Not that a few decades ago, feminism was not multifaceted with different types of nuances, but globally the goal was the same, reaching equality. Maybe the path could be different, but the goal was the same. And today, there are emerging voices within the women who have the feeling that not be the equal of men is not such a big deal. Maybe it's not something that is absolutely mandatory, and maybe the true fight is to choose the type of life we want to live and to conduct. And we're going to see that that has an impact. So some women choose the one who maybe want to reach equality, like in South Korea, for instance, because in South Korea, women, when they gain power, where they are on top of a company, it has become impossible for them to find a husband. That's very rooted in the South Korean society. So now they've decided that they will not suffer that situation, and they decide that they won't get married. It's not that they are rejected, they don't want to get married, and they make a very strong choice. And they have decided that they have to live their life And if the equality is at the expense of a fulfilling personal life, they don't care. So it leads to taking very radical stances. And on the other way, there are, and these figures are pretty striking, even if the difference is super light. But as you can see, women and men should share equal responsibility in the household. The percentage of women between 18 to 34 who agree with that is lower than the global sample size of women. And it's true that in pop culture, in social media, there's this trad-wife movement which is gaining ground. And one of the bestsellers right now in the US is called Yesteryear. It's the number 3 sold book of fiction in the US. It's about a trad-wife influencer who during the night travels back in time, and she wakes up in the 19th century in a farm in Oklahoma. And she realized what it is really to be a trad wife. And it's a very funny and interesting book, and it's the bestseller in the US. So it shows that it's really something that is questioning deeply society. So it looks us to something that can look a little bit desperate when it's the square of sadness. It's not the triangle of sadness, it's the square of sadness where no one is happy because no one has the feeling to be understood and listened by the other one. For instance, the masculinity fans have the feeling that society and women have rejected them. That's their perception. Maybe it's not true, it's probably not true, but it's how they feel. So they feel rejected and they feel that they have to be violent again to make their situation better again. You have the men who would like to embrace a more nuanced and balanced approach of masculinity, who have the feeling that they are rejected by some of their peers, who think that they are too soft, and that maybe for the trad wife, they are not at all seductive. So we choose just match the top left with the bottom left, but unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in life. You're always attracted by your opposite. And when it comes to women, you have this tension as well between the one who want to go back to so-called womanhood values and have the feeling that society is not embracing that because it's perceived as too conservative and polarizing, and women who want to keep the fight true and real and tough for equality, and who see that actually maybe the last inch is more and more difficult to reach. So it's a little bit complicated because no one is happy, and when no one is happy, the future is not bright. So the question is the following: are we experiencing the great detachment? Probably. It doesn't mean that, at that time of the year and this day probably doesn't mean that in 2 or to 5 years it would not have changed, but we are not very optimistic when it comes to that. I believe that online male communities provide valuable support that men can't find elsewhere, for instance. So, and it's the problem is not the support, is the content associated with the support, because the content, as Seb mentioned, is all about Andrew Tate quotations framed like if it was Aristotle sentence, So it's their your new guides. So that's the problem, because the support that is providing online is of course the most radical, because when if it bleeds, it leads, as we say in the US media. So of course we fuel in permanence the machine with polarizing content. So maybe that's why the men have the feeling that the dating market has become unfair to them. And actually, unfortunately, 2 days ago, on Monday, there was that has been qualified of terrorist attack in Canada, and it's an incel who has killed 2 persons, and he wrote a manifesto, which was an incel manifesto, mixing anti-Semitism with racist comments and very strong violence against women. So it's becoming a threat for society, and a true terrorist threat classified like that. So maybe the solution is to live in distinct spaces. So I would like to see more female-only spaces. It's not new, and we can understand that because at night or even at days in a lot of countries, the spaces are dominated by men, so it's not easy to be a woman and work alone. But what is completely insane, I mean, we don't judge the figures and we never judge the consumers, but what is interesting, I would say, is to see the 33% of prosumers who agree to say that they would like to see more male-only spaces when actually, I mean, it's almost everywhere. So that's a little bit challenging, I would say. And last chart before jumping to the last part, I think so. It means that the perception that we have in terms of role and functions are much more radicalized and gender extreme. Because when we ask the question, what is man first role and what is woman first role, it's still very gender-based and gender-biased. For men, it would be to protect and defend family, and for women, it's to educate children. And what is striking again? Boomers, Gen Z. We thought when we coined the term Gen Z that they would be more progressive and so on and so on. In some ways, they are, but not so much. And only 28% of boomers believe that the first job of woman is to educate the children, and it's 40% of Gen Z. So there's something really interesting and new when it comes to that.
Okay, so it's Thursday morning. We didn't want to depress you, but this is real. This is real, and it's very worrying. So we wanted, of course, to understand, like, okay, what's next then? Like, how can we solve the problem, and especially for the younger ones? And as I was saying, like, consumers are saying something and then doing something else. So they think masculinity is under attack. They think that strength and violence could be an answer. But at the same time, they are worried that young people are more and more exposed to toxic masculinity representation on social media. Well, whose fault is this? Ours, the older ones. But it's very worrying, and we see here, especially male and female. It's everybody agrees. And as I was saying at the beginning, it only takes 26 minutes to see a masculinist content on TikTok. So yes, it's worrying, and people are right to be worried, because what we see, and Clément was speaking about this a few minutes ago, is that when it comes to Gen Z, actually, the split is really gender-based, and we see everywhere in the world when it comes to political opinions, voting, when it comes to opinions on society, young men are going way more conservative and young women are going way more progressive. And so when we see that today it's more difficult to be a man than a woman, 36% of Gen Z, we think it's really carried by the young men who agree with the statement, because young women are going way more progressive and trying to be to fight for equality and being on the progress side.
This is very important, because seems a light study about identity, masculine, and so on, but we are in the center of political orientation. For French people, you know what you arrive in France. But it's in every country's history. Democracy is linked to the woman. And the other is a problem, and is a problem of the young generation. And we have to invent, we have not to stop moving, we have to invent ways to avoid this, to speaking with the young, to have a capacity to exchange, because we cannot accept this kind of thing. And I think the men are like this, but the women are culpabilized because they consider they are too difficult, too hard with the men. And they said, okay, sometimes we take the place of the men, and the dramaturgy is so strong, it's so complicated. And it's the reason this study, for me, it's very clear in the fact you have a relation with the progressives and with conservative linked to the woman and to the men. I just want to say more than 90%, 90% of the violence is made by men in the world. And it's a drama. We are in a situation never we imagine. We have in the world where technology is progressing all the time and people are regressing all the time. It's the same, it's a contrary orientation. It's problematic of education, it's problematic of culture, and people are less and less oriented to understand the positivity of the democracy, the progressivity, the capacity of discuss together. This seems strong problematic. And we have to avoid, in some parts of the world, I don't know where, but Europe can be very important in this, to propose an alternative to the people. And don't consider it's a story of not your children. I have 5 boys. 5. One of my boys is a DJ and spends the time saying, for me, it's no future because I am not a girl. I said, what is the story? What is his story? It's because when they choose DJ, they choose DJ girls. I said, but before you are alone. Now you have to share. Sorry. It doesn't upset this. It's very difficult. The change of the world with the complication of the world is very difficult for the young boys. We have to invent new ways to speak with them because we can accept this kind of problematic. Je te laisse finir?
Yes. And when it comes to the future, people have realized that if this is happening, if we hear so many speeches, remember this influencer on social media after the victory of Trump saying to women, your body, my choice. People have realized that it's the guilt of social media. I'm convinced that algorithms on social media are shaping a more violent generation of men. 56% of prosumers. Of course, Gen Z is understanding that a little bit more than boomers. And I want to encourage you to see this documentary on Netflix from Louis Theroux around the masculinity. And the guy is really explaining the model of social media is that the more antagonism you have, the more engagement you create. The more engagement you create, the more money you make. It's as simple as that. Like being together, trying to discuss, trying to agree is not something that's successful on social media. Hate, violence is something that creates money on social media, and people have really started to understand that. So what are the solutions? Then to all the parents in the room, it's your problem. It's both parents' responsibility to raise their child to become a strong man. What is interesting here is that we gave people the choice. Is it the role of the father to raise a strong man? Is it the role of the mother? Or is it the role of both parents? So something to hope for is that a huge majority, 91% of people, said it's both parents' responsibility to raise a strong man. So how do we want to raise them? If I had a boy child, I would teach him. So here, we gave people several choices. And the first one, we're happy, is to respect women, but it's only 58%. You're like, where the fuck is the rest? Like, the 40 other percent. But still, the first choice. So let's try to be on the positive and hope side. Kindness and empathy and to be courageous. So still, as Clément was saying, there is some contradiction. There are different role models, navigating, and this is why also this is the age of confusion. And it's funny, you were talking about technology. For people, as in the climate change problem, as in everything, people think that technology is going to solve everything. And if we can't do it, then technology is going to do it. So I believe that AI and technology should specifically be targeted to men to detect and prevent violent impulses. A big difference between prosumer and mainstream. And we're going to see China, Saudi Arabia, and India, countries who believe hugely in technology that are really high on this statement. So we're in Cannes, we're talking about marketing, we're talking about brands, creativity. This is a very serious and very important topic, and we see that it needs to be addressed. So, of course, government are doing things. In France now, the DGSI, so the French Intel, is considering that masculinism is a form of terrorism. So the head of the DGSI in France said it's a form of terrorism. So they're doing things, but we think that brands can also do things, and especially it's always interesting to see where people are and what they think about the messages that brands have been sending to them. Men's grooming and beauty brands have feminized masculinity too much. It's not a majority, but still it's 40% of prosumers, 41% of male consumers. So maybe, at some point, brands went too far on gender blurred, etc., and maybe it's also part of the backlash that we see glorifying strength, dominance, traditional masculinity. And also, what is really scary is that male beauty standard, people now consider that they are as toxic as women beauty standard. And you were talking about your friends. I have friends who have a 17-year-old boy, and he's doing jawline exercise because he thinks he's going to become more attractive if he has la mâchoire carrée, as we say in French. And he's also doing the gym at home, etc., etc. So it has become quite toxic. And then you all remember American Psycho from a long time ago. People are trying to repeat American Psycho morning routine, but not with a second degree, as we don't say in English, not with so much distance. And if social media is creating antagonism, we saw that, I don't know if you've seen, so this guy who is kind of like the new face of masculinity in the US, Clavicular, who is ready to go to the edge to become the most beautiful man on the planet, like who cares? And he's been walking in a fashion week in Paris 2 days ago because brands are ready to go anywhere to have some buzz and some virality.
Fortunately, the backlash was enormous.
Yeah. But
the
anyway.
designer apologized.
So if they are promoting antagonism, we think it's important that brands can build bridges and not boundaries. Like encourage, as Clément was saying, is the separation the only option? Are we going to live apart? How can we bring people back together and show diversity in masculinity? Like you are a man, you can be the man you want. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to show strength at the same time. You can be a man in all its complexity, basically. And we see more and more, and that's interesting, more and more brands that are acting as like peacemakers, and especially traditional masculine brands like football teams, beer brands that are encouraging young men to speak about mental health issues, to address the friendship or the loneliness issue, and we see that more and more, and we see that also as a good sign. And you can still reclaim strength without glorifying dominance. Strength is also about mastery, it's about resilience, it's about physicality. And this is not strength against someone, but it's strength to stand up as someone, as a good man, and not necessarily a real man. And as because we want to depress you before you leave, there is still a lot of progress to be made. So I don't know if women in the room smoke cigars or drink whiskey. It's not your place, ladies. I believe that certain products, cigars, whiskey, luxury watches, sports car, are intrinsically masculine. 50% globally agree with the statement. 43% of male. And thank God, it's only 36% in France, which is still high, but it's a little bit better. So this is the study we wanted to share, and the topic. We see really the return to this idea that because women are advancing, men feel that it's against them. So the response is really around violence, around trying to dominate again. And of course, the return of this traditional masculinity. 15 years ago, we were like, wow, the metrosexual is coming. It's going to be... Well, it has changed. It has not disappeared, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And as Mercedes was saying, it's important to address this issue as a brand also, because it's important that the diversity in the way we represent ourselves as men and women is more accepted, especially in a world where everything, the content the younger ones consume comes from social media, and these platforms are created on antagonism to create engagement and money. It's also the role of brands who are basically paying for the platform and investing in the platform to promote something else and to promote more dialogue and more coming together. Voilà. Thank you. Yeah.